Hi, I am Jennifer Purcell, and welcome to my podcast, Living with an Invisible Learning Challenge, where we will discuss, discover, and learn more about the challenges and triumphs of those with NLD and other learning challenges. I do have a website for this podcast, and it is called livingwithnld.com. I also have a Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter account for the podcast. They are all under the same name, which is Living with NLD. I also have a YouTube channel for the podcast, which can be found by Googling the title of the podcast, which is Living with an Invisible Learning Challenge. I would like to tell you about a nonprofit that I use for my research for this podcast. It is called the NVLD Project, and I use their blog for my research. They are a nonprofit that is based in New York and is trying to get NVLD back on the DSM, and they provide many resources for people with NVLD on their website. I'll provide you with the website for them in the podcast description. All proceeds from the ads on this podcast will be donated towards the NVLD project. Please feel free to explore the other topics on the podcast, and hopefully you will learn something new from them. I hope you enjoy today's episodes. It's hard on my mom too, because she helped me a lot in college with helping me proofread my essays and helping me try to make them sound smoother and better in quality. And she did that for 2 years, and that was a lot because I was a sociology major, so it was a lot of work. Were you able to go to college? Because I know sometimes that's hard for people with learning disabilities.
I was able to go to college. I was able to go to colleges as comprehensive programs for learning disabilities. I went to Dean College, and then I transferred on to Curry College. And I was fortunate to go to Dean because they had to reject a lot of people that year because it was around the trend of everyone needs to go to college at the beginning of the trend. And these LD programs sound wonderful, but they can't take every LD kid. They only take 25 to 30 each year. And the director of admissions later told my parents, like, we can tell you this now, but because the director is going to be honest with you, she was hesitant to accept your daughter, but because of your testing score, just various factors, like despite what people think, GPA and everything's that, there's just factors into making the decision. But so then they did say what sealed the deal was she always took the academic program. We could tell that she wasn't having as many accommodations that she probably would have qualified for. Like you and Bill did was smart about how you made your decisions, like you took a risk, like, and the risk was appropriate. Like I look back, like there's no way that I could have taken the upper level math course. Like if that was the case, the teacher would have failed me. But for a class, like a higher level English course, I could do, like it took more time at home, but because I didn't mind doing the work, so much of that course was writing papers. With math, like you have to know all the formulas, how to draw the shapes, and that was like nearly impossible for me. And then what they did say, like the one thing that they say, and this is again going back to the beginning, why I wanted to focus on inclusion in sports. The one thing that closed the deal is I had my track coach Penny write me a recommendation, and Jim write me a recommendation. It was more like, it wasn't a year, it was more like a questionnaire. They wanted to know like how you looked at adults. So what would you say was the biggest strength? And for the LD program, they wanted it to be a non-academic person. But for college, because they already had college recommendations. And in many ways, the coach does help you, like a resource room teacher does. Like it's more relaxed, just a little more relaxed. And they wanted to see how you were through something that was difficult and how you connected to adults. And that's how I got to go to Curly and Dean, because I was always doing the most challenging things. And I was always a respectful and a dedicated and committed, incredibly committed athlete. So when they saw my application, they were like, Eileen's going to show up to every academic coach meeting that her parents paid for. Like a lot of kids, the parents throw money down the drain. And then because of that, sometimes we have to cut our tours because there's not enough kids who stayed in the program. And if with Eileen, like everything on, unless she goes through a drastic change, everything on record is showing us that this goal is going to succeed. And so I didn't really have a hard time in college. Like I had a hard time, like everyone does in the transition, no doubt about it. But because it was a structured program, the director of the program knew us really well. And we were assigned our academic coach, like Lynn specialist. Everyone has a different term. And she functioned like a resource room teacher because she saw you regularly. It wasn't like a local college where many of my classmates went, and many of them dropped out, where everything followed on the student. They didn't track you down unless it was like a major issue, like in danger of failing a course or misbehaving in the dorm. But usually by the time, if you didn't show up by the time they contacted you, it was almost too late to solve the issue. And when I was in my program, I saw the woman 3 to 4 times a week. 4 times a week my first year for the transition, then gradually you downsize. And she had access to my grades like my resource room teacher and school counselor could. So if there were issues, like you can't solve everything, sometimes you're gonna get a lower grade than you want, but we were able to work it out so things finished the best way they possibly could. Like it didn't mean that every kid was going to make dean's list. That's just unfeasible. Like Lynn specialists and not miracle workers. But the students who are dedicated, many students received B and C's because they were able to get out of holes before it became too deep. Because the parents were paying a lot of money, so the kids who were showing up, they made sure the kids finished the best that they could do. And of course, too, if a kid wasn't showing up, like after a while, they would call the parents, like, hey, I'm really sorry, it's a lot of money, but he needs to quit the program or he needs to stop coming. Like I have students who could benefit from extra time. And I'm giving it up for them because college is a privilege.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Just a couple more questions. What would you tell others who have NLD or a learning disability as motivation when they might get frustrated or discouraged?
I would first say, if the situation, like my frustrations became more in sports, because like I had academic frustrations, don't get me wrong, but I feel like the resource room teachers and the classroom teachers were more likely to get you to laugh it off or to overcome it, because they were used to people with challenges day in, day out. It's harder in an extra activity like sports or theater, because many of the kids who are not good in sport, they drop out. That's just reality, like unless they have a lot of friends. So like for me, and like when my parents sensed frustration saying me, and again, I was fortunate, like my track, both were teachers in the district, cross country was too, but that wasn't as big of a deal because it was just one season. Like province arise, but it wasn't like it was all year. Like track was pretty much second semester all the way through. But like everything, you need to have open communication, because if the coaches know that something's bothering you, they'll go out of their way to fix it. Especially if it comes for you and the parent. That's like I understand at times, and teachers come up to coaches and say, "This kid's struggling." It frustrates them. I used to get angry at that, but now that like I look to people in schools and support kids in NLD, I get why Penny and Jim and Diane liked it more than my mom and I went down and talked to them directly rather than like the school counselor. Obviously, they trusted what the school council said, but hearing it from the individual who's suffering, it goes a long way because they can tell by your they can tell by your tone of voice that you're becoming discouraged, you want to give up, or you don't want to do this event anymore. Can I try something else? Because when not that when the counselor or the research room teacher it isn't true, but sometimes kids don't always open up to the counselors or the research. And not that they will open up to the coaches all the time necessarily, like I was able to do. But most of the time, the coach can tell if there's more to give, like I'm missing something, just by your facial expressions. But in the counselors, if someone else is telling you that, you have a hard time it's just as bad as it seems because you're not seeing their own emotions or their own tone of voice.
Yeah, that it does make sense to me. One other question then, which is kind of similar to that one, for people who, like they're not diagnosed yet with the learning disability or NLD, but they want to get a diagnosis, how would you encourage them to do that?
I do know just because it's not in DSM-5, many school psychologists will not do classification. But if there's someone like me that it clearly says is most likely an NLD, the parents are entitled to file a report and say, like they would for like a private school placement, they are allowed to say, like, you're not providing this test and we found this neuropsych. Like I went outside of Boston for mine. Like we are requesting you to pay for it. We'd be able to settle that release. We'll split the cost and our insurance will cover the rest. And that's how I got tested. The CFC chair was like, no, we're paying the whole thing. You have done everything on your own. We've gone through a lot of changes as you've been pushy, but you've never been negative. Like your pushiness has always been professional, that you're a dedicated teacher and you're a wonderful mother. And the thing about Eileen is like, she's a sport life outside of academics. Like we talk to her teachers, we talk to her club advisors, and we talk to her coaches, and they all say the same thing. There's more to what she has, like there's something missing on her classification, and it's not autism. It's not, I don't believe it's other health impaired because she doesn't have attentional issues. And I think, and by being connected, like the district knew they had to pay because like because all the information was there. And the district in theory has to pay anyway. If it's not something that they can provide and they're recommending it to the parents, like they were recommending a new classification, but they didn't provide the one that we thought. But it really does help if you are connected. The more like they see more and they understand, like, I think this is accurate.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense to me. Last question for you, as you look back in your life, what is the proudest accomplishment that you have?
I would say my proudest accomplishment was, and I know this sounds, but I'll keep it to the theme of what I've been talking about, determination and courage. In 10th grade, I received the coaches award on my track team. And I know like this, it's just a school award. It was nothing county wise. But that year, many people didn't. I was basically advised to become a team manager because of my go smaller skills. And my mom figured out a way, not like not aggressively or rudely. Like she basically talked to like the individual coaches to figure out the best placement. Like you would as a parent, figuring out the best academic placements. And we figured out that joining cross country in the fall to be ready for track was the right decision. And that spring, I got the team award because the year before, all I could run was a 200 or less. Like I would literally run a 400 at practice and be tired. Like I would do it just because I was on the team. Like I can't stop. I can't have people laugh at me this soon. But by 10th grade, by doing the transition to cross country, Penny gave me the most improved award, and the coaches, like the most improved coaches. I forget the name of the award, but that's pretty much what it was, the criteria. And she talked about how I have this athlete who would run anything for me, and the award winner went from only doing exhibition 100 and occasionally exhibition 200 to run any event that I wanted her to run, ranging from the 400 to the 3,000. And even though she only ran the 3,000 once because we realized it wasn't appropriate for her, there were too many fast runners in the race, given the nature of it, she still did it and was always open. And the rest of the teammates, if I got stuck, I could count on Eileen to do it. I had one other person, so I was able to put her in the 1,500 and 800 and 1,000 indoor. But the year before, like I didn't even know if she'd be able to finish the practices because of how low. Like she didn't say my name, obviously. Like she didn't mind give it away, but like she didn't even know like if I was gonna be able to finish or if something would happen at practice. And throughout it all, like many of the races, luckily, many of them, like the seizures occurred sometimes, but luckily they happened after the race. But one time I had done the 4x8 and that year, and my eyes, I guess, were like bloodshot, and my coach was like, I don't know, you should run the next event. I'm kind of nervous. And of course, I'm a stubborn and determined 10th grader. Like, no, everyone, if I don't run, everyone's just going to say, we told you you couldn't do the sport. Like, I still had that on my mind. So I went ahead and ran the 1,500. And in the middle of the way, like, probably 400 meters left, maybe less than that because of the indoor track. Maybe it was more like 200. Regardless, I had one lap around, I think. My headache started. I'm like, oh geez, Penny was right. But I persevered. I crossed the finish line, and like, of course, the seizure comes in for first. At first, we're like incredibly nervous, but then like a half an hour later, once everything's good, Penny just laughed and said, you don't have to be too determined. There are times when you can say no. So like receiving this award was probably, even though it seems small, it was the starting point. Like I'm going to prove people wrong. And of course, graduating college was huge too. No one thought I could go to college. And they were right. I could never have gone to college at just any college. My parents had to find a program that was structured and organized. And then the toss up for that would be my junior year. I received the section 10 sportsmanship award for cross country. Being with other athletes, many of them who were fast, like really gave me like, I wish more people in my situation could have these opportunities for inclusion, because me and Jim in cross country and Penny and Diane and women in spring track have already showed that like that kids with disabilities similar to NLD. At that time, so few had classifications. So I can't really say NLD. Like, I didn't get classified until my senior year. But like, regardless, we made them realize that kids need more. These kids need encouragement, and adults. Not everyone has the commitment, but adults, certain educators and counselors and coaches need to look on the caseloads a little deeper and say who could do more than being a team manager. And for me, like, that's why, like, my athletic awards, in some ways, I'm more prouder than my college diploma, because you do nowadays, like, not that I'm not very proud, it's just you hear more about kids graduating from college, but you still don't hear about coaches giving kids with disabilities athletic awards.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense to me. For me, I was proud of being able to graduate from college as well, because I remember when I did like a summer program to prepare for going to college, and it was required for me, and they made it required because of being homeschooled, and they didn't think that I was going to be able to get through the program and succeed in Berkeley because of being homeschooled. Well, and not before, I didn't know about NLD in the summer program, but I think that if they had known about it, that probably would have been part of that too. But I proved them wrong, and I can relate to what you were saying about the athletic award piece, because even though I didn't go to a public school like you did, I was a runner and still am, and being able to do sports is challenging when you have NLD. And I did a lot of half marathons when I was in high school, and I always trained for the distance. I didn't usually train for doing it in a certain amount of time, but when I did my first full marathon, I did better than I thought I would with the distance. And a couple of weeks later, I got a thing in the mail from them, and it was a second place award for my age bracket for the time that I did it in, which for me, getting that at 17 and being able to do it in, I think it was a little over 5 hours, that felt good to me because of having, I didn't know I had NLD then, but looking back at that definitely felt good to me, because like you were saying, usually people with learning disabilities don't get acknowledged in sports. So I can relate to that as well.
Yeah, my coach, and I'm very lucky, my coach Penny Show, she's a true woman of change. She talks, and she's still coaching today, but she's been a part of every I don't want to say every change in the United States, whether it's Title IX and women's rights, and then the ADA was passed in 1990. She was, like, my mom was an inclusion coordinator. She was one of the teachers that were on board, like, this is fantastic. I'm glad that we have this. They ended up coaching a youth soccer team together because she needed an extra body because a few of the kids had issues. And my mom had just moved back to Augsburg and said, told her brother, who was a sports writer, I can help you. And then later on, they finished the track with her. Like, she's still coaching today, and she's had teams on it. Like, I was the first, but after about probably 8 to 10 years, probably about 5 or 6 years after me, when inclusion did start going forward, she had more people, because she switched to modified too, which you always have more modified, just because the competitive kids feel less pressure. But she coached kids with autism, and like one of the families that I know, that's a family friend, says she's the best coach she ever had. And years later, like my mom loved, we all loved our coaches. We were very lucky. Diane was a resource teacher. Jim was a family friend, had a special education son with special needs. Unfortunately, in the 88 years past, he was already a 10th grader, junior in high school. So he didn't really, while he was able to make changes because they came from a supportive family, they were both teachers too. And the mom was developmental kindergarten and dealt with special ed kids. Different because I was starting school. So every change that was going to be made, I was going to be in part of, just because of our family value. Like, I don't mean that specifically, like not everyone wants change, but my parents believed in change. And was Jeff only had 2 years. So he got to be on the track team for a year, but it was harder for him because it was new. A lot of people went all for the change. And then I continued to, but for him, I would say he was my best coach in the sense of a mentor, because Penny and Diane walk on water to me, always will. But Jim knew how to deal with what you said about any times you wish you didn't have NLD or the emotional issues, because his son Jeff had been there many times. And whereas Penny, as a track coach, she gave me that type of care, no doubt, never put her down. Like, she went out of her way for me, like, and she knows that. But the empathy wasn't totally there, because when it's your child, it's a totally different ballgame. So you can have a little more compassion. Like my mom was always a great teacher, no doubt. But my mom became an exceptional teacher when we were figuring out our diagnosis, because when you live at home, you have different types of emotions. And with Penny, any type of change or any type of right that I was entitled to, she was going to make sure I had it, because she was more into the political changes and the rights of our society. Like, people with disabilities should not be treated equal. Just like in 74, women should never have not been allowed to be on sports teams. The gender and disability doesn't define you. And for me, like, she was the best coach I could have.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense to me in how you're describing how she helped you. Is there anything else?
Jim was my mentor, I guess is the best way to say it. As much as Jim coached me, like, everyone brings something else. Like, everyone has a favorite teacher for a different reason. Penny was my advocate and coach, like the rights being made. Jim was the person I could go to if I was having a bad day and just needed the encouragement to keep moving forward. Because with his son, and his son's like me, like my sister's very gifted. She's an attorney. Jeff's the same way. His sister is a head attorney in Boston, was a head attorney. Now she's still an attorney, but does nonprofit for education. His brother Jason, while as equally as bright, chose a different path, but he's a successful teacher. So like me, the home situations were always the same, because they lived through it every day and shared the same values, became teachers. They became teachers a year and a half before my parents. So they were from the same generation, shared the same values, wanted the same things for the kids, disability or not. So like, he was the one that I'm still today, I'm close to both, but I would say he's more a friend and a personal friend now, and Penny is my forever coach, my forever advocate, because that there was ever change or something that I want, know I'm right to, like, I know Penny would be right there complaining about it too.
Mm. Well, that definitely makes sense to me. Thank you for letting me interview you. Is there anything else you want to say before we wrap up?
I just would like to say, like, and I know, like, as I said, I know I may be really biased, but from the care that I received from Penny Show, Jim Adams, Diane Janelle, that there is a sport that does not have a cuts policy. That means that you can earn your right to be the best athlete and teammate that you can be. It doesn't mean that you necessarily be a star or be in every meet, but it gives you the opportunity to still be still be in other teammates and to be able to have endless social opportunities. And you may, and the chances are too, teachers, coaches, music people, they love to support the hardest worker. And if you show up and you give 100%, you might get that lucky break and be able to be in the meet that you never thought you were ever going to be in. And like, I can say that many times over. Once I became a distance runner, Penny never left me out at sectionals. It wasn't like I got to run every event, but I was in at least one event. And she just told the coaches, she's my hardest working athlete. I'm sorry, I'm not removing her from the lineup. I have faster runners, but they all have her determination. And they haven't showed up to practice every day. And having a mom as a runner, I think that's a general trend in a sport like cross country or track and field. And I hope that more and more understand that. And I also recommend that you start as soon as you can, because you develop more of an interest that way. And coaches, especially in sport like track, where coaches have you all 4 years, coaches understand you more and know what support to give you. Like our first year in 7th grade, as I said, making forced choices, it was rocky. But as each year, like, we understood each other, and more importantly, she learned more and more about my disability. And we never had issues again. I finished my athletic career with 4 track awards and 2 cross country awards. So, which is a testament that if you're ready to have the courage, the dedication, and the will to make friends, there's a spot for you.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So we'll wrap up here. And like I said, thank you for letting me interview you today.
Oh, no problem. I'm happy to be in.
And today I am very excited to announce that BetterHelp is now sponsoring this podcast. I have had 7 years of therapy, so I know it can help change your life if you not only let it, but work on the personal goals that you set with your therapist. Without a healthy mind, being truly happy and at peace is hard. The good news is therapy works. But what is therapy exactly? It's whatever you want it to be. Maybe you're not feeling motivated right now and would like some tools to help. Or maybe you're feeling insecure in relationships at work, not dealing well with stress. Whatever you need, it's time to stop being ashamed of normal human struggles and start feeling better because you deserve to be happy. And now you don't have to worry about finding an in person therapist near you to help. BetterHelp is customized online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your therapist. So you don't have to see anyone on camera if you don't want to. It's more affordable than in person therapy, and you can start communicating with your therapist in under 48 hours. Join the millions of people who are seeing what online therapy is really about. It's always a good time to invest in yourself because you are the greatest asset. And special offering to listeners of Living with an Invisible Learning Challenge. You can get 10% off your first month of professional therapy at betterhelp.com/. I'll put in the link in the podcast description for you. That's BetterHelp, HELEP. Thanks again to BetterHelp for sponsoring this podcast. I also wanted to let you know that I started a Patreon account for this podcast to try to get some more revenue from it. That's not the reason why I started this podcast, but I'm trying to get some revenue from the podcast because it will help me keep it going. So if you are willing to donate even $1 or $2 or $5, whatever amount is comfortable for you, to Patreon for Living with an Invisible Learning Challenge, that would be appreciated. You can also use Spotify to donate money, and you can also use BetterHelp to donate money with clicking on the link and becoming a customer of BetterHelp. So those are 3 different ways you can support the podcast, and I hope that you will choose which way works for you, and that you will choose which level works for you as well. And I hope that you do it because the podcast helps you also, and that you are willing to support me in continuing to produce it. Thank you. As I wrap up, there are some things I would like to share with you. I do have a website for this podcast. It is called livingwithnld.com. I also have a Facebook and Instagram page for this podcast. It is called Living with NLD. I will include the links for those in the description. In conclusion, I would like to hear from my audience. If you know individuals with NLD that I could interview for this podcast, please email me at livingwithnld@gmail.com. What are you interested in learning about NLD? I know I'm not an expert, but I do know I have the living experience of having it. I would like you to practice journaling about your gifts and differences. Also, see if there is a way that you can make that difference become easier for you to do than it originally was. Thank you for listening today, and please go to my YouTube channel and subscribe to it. Thank you. Bye.